And without further ado, let's go ahead and get on with Chapter 9, Arrays. And we're going to get started by talking about array basics. And arrays are an absolutely critical fundamental building block of any programming language, so it's really vital that you understand how to use and execute arrays. So if you remember from last semester, a class is an object that stores a group of related data and the methods that operate on that data. Well, like a class, an array also stores a group of related data, but an array does not store methods. Another difference between an array and a class is that an array's data must all be of the same type. Whereas a class, you could store different things. You could have a class that has ints and floats and other reference objects. Well, an array can only hold one type of data. So here's a picture of an array that holds a list of phone numbers. And in each of the 5 boxes is called an array element. And so each box stores one phone number. So you can see the first element stores the first number and the last element stores the last phone number. Pretty simple, right? Well, a class uses dot notation to access one of its members. On the other hand, an array uses square brackets around an index to access one of its elements. So what does that mean? Okay, well, we have our indexes from 0 to whatever. Okay, and that's a fundamental thing to remember, is that arrays start off with 0 indexing. All right, so notice this number right here. That is our first index. That's our first spot. Okay, and here's how to access each one of those 5 elements in the phone array, the phone list array. Note again that it starts with 0 and not 1. Okay. That is absolutely critical that you keep that in mind. So how do you update elements in an array? Well, here's how you could change the first number to another number. You can see here that we're accessing the phone list's 0th index, and we are setting it equal to this number right here with an assignment operation. And as another example, here's how you would print the second phone number. Notice that we're printing the second phone number, but we are indexing it with 1 because indexes start with 0. So let's take a look at a working example of this. And here I'm using Visual Studio Code instead of text editor, just to give some variety. You absolutely continue to use TextPad if you want, or you can start venturing out and trying out different IDEs to see what you like. In this situation, I'm using Visual Studio Code, and I really like Visual Studio Code because you can use it for any number of languages. You just have to install the appropriate extensions to make sure that you can actually run it. So in this case, what I actually have running is I have just some Java extension packs installed and the Code Runner extension installed. So if we look at show installed extensions, these are some of the ones. I've got C++ in here. I've got some JavaScript stuff in here because I work in a couple different languages, Python. So, but if you want to use this, Code Runner is an extension that you can use, and then also the Java extension pack as well to help you actually run your code. But anyway, we're talking about arrays. So here we have the contact list class. And in it, you can see that we are declaring a phone list array of type long. And this is the syntax that you use for declaration. It's long, it's the type, followed by the braces, followed by the name for it. And then here we're going to prompt the user for how many numbers we would like to enter. And we are going to assign a new long array to that phone list. Because remember, phone list is just a pointer. It's just a temporary holding spot for a memory address that's going to point to where the actual array is at. And so here you can see where we're actually creating the array with the keyword new, and we have to pass in a size. And with arrays, they're not dynamic. We can't grow and shrink an array as we wish. We have to know up front how much space we want to have in the array. So that's why we have to ask the user for how many phone numbers we want to enter. And so here we're creating that array, and we're setting the reference that it returns to the phone list. And then from 0, because we start with 0, while I is less than the size of the list, right? And the size of the list is just the variable that we entered. We're going to step through those and enter a phone number and store that phone number that's entered into that array. Now, of course, we could also simplify this code. If you would like to make it, a little bit more streamlined, you could just say, well, couldn't you just do this? Whoops. And I would say you absolutely could. That would simplify the code, and we're just grabbing the next one and storing it. But this is an intermediate step where we are storing the variable temporarily. Okay. So that's just for clarity. And then here we're going to print out the contest lists that are entered, right? So for each one of those, go ahead and print it out. So let's take it for a run and see what it looks like. Whoops. Let's try that again. There we go. Let's stop running it. Delete our output. There we go. So now it's a little bit clearer. All right, so how many numbers would you like to enter? Let's just do 2, right? Enter a phone number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Except for these are longs, so we can't use dashes. Enter a phone number. 7, 8, 9, 4, 5, 3, 2. All right. Notice how we're not checking lengths. We're not doing any input validation. We're just entering a number and then printing it out. And that's exactly what happened, right? So there you have it. You can see how the array we went through, and for each one we requested the user to input a value, and then after they were done, we spit it back out. Nothing all that exciting. It just shows you how the arrays work. So let's take a look again at how we actually declare an array. An array is a variable, and as such, you must declare it before you can use it, just like everything else, right? So here is the syntax that you see, that you have 2 different ways to do this. We have the standard way, which is you have the element type followed by the bracket, right there, followed by the name, okay? Alternatively, you could put the bracket here at the end of the variable name. Now that is not accepted standard practices, so don't do it that way. But here's what it looks like as a couple examples, right? So we've got an array of integers called IDs, we have an array of doubles called work hours, and we have an array of strings called names, right? So it's pretty self-explanatory, but again, these are the ways that you'll want to do it, okay? This is, just don't do it. It's legal, but it's bad practice. So now that we've declared our arrays, how do we actually create them? Well, in Java, arrays are objects. And as with all objects, they are created or instantiated with the new operator, just like we saw in the example. So we must specify the type of the array and the size of it. Okay, so we saw that previously where we were asking the user how many do we put in, and the user is going to say, I want 9. And then so that 9 will be simply a variable, or you could hard code it if you know in advance how many it's going to be. Right? So in this case, we are declaring the long phone list, or the phone list of longs, and then we are creating the array and assigning it to phone list. And of course, it's legal to combine an array's declaration, creation, and assignment operators, right? So we can initialize, well, excuse me, this is an initialization, right? Because we haven't actually assigned values to those, to the phone list. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video and create a single statement that declares, creates, and assigns a 100 element array that stores book titles. So go ahead and do that now, just to get to the practice, right? Okay, so hopefully you paused the video. If you didn't, shame on you. And here's what you should have gotten. Okay, we're declaring an array of strings called book titles, and we're making it 100, the size of 100. So we talked about declaring them and creating the arrays, but how do we actually initialize them? Well, let's take a look. An array initializer is a single statement made up of an array, declaration, creation, and a assignment using braces. Here's an example. So we have our element type followed by our braces or our brackets, followed by the name, and then we assign it usually a comma delimited list of whatever things that are in there, right? So when an array is initialized, this is what it would look like. Here we've got an array of students, and we got Hamoud, Lead, and Brandon. Okay, this is an initializer. Note that when you're initializing an array, you create an array object without using the new operator. So in the past, we would have to put new string, right? Size, say 5. Okay. We don't have to do that when we're using the braces. Okay, you just put in your comma separated list, and the Java compiler knows what you're doing and will automatically take care of that. However, this will not work. You can't declare an array and then later try to initialize it with the braces. Okay, this right here is bad. Won't work. All right, you have to do it all in one line like this. So we talked last semester about default values, but what are the default values when you're working with an array? Well, an array is an object, and an array's elements are the instance variable for an array object. So as such, an array's elements get the default values when the array is instantiated, the same way as they would any other instance variable getting default values. You're like, Mr. Willinger, that's confusing. What is, I'm not following. Okay, so here's the default values, and if you remember from last semester, if it's an integer, it gets a value of 0. If it's a floating point, it gets 0.0. Boolean, false, and a reference variable is set to null. All right. So if we were to declare an array of floats called GPAs, what would the default values be? Well, they would all be set to 0.0. And if we declared in a string of states, those 50 states, since they're strings and strings are a reference object, it would be set to null. Another important aspect of an array is its length property, and you'll use this quite often. And it basically tells you what the array's size is, right? So suppose you have a 5-element colors array that's been initialized like this, okay? We've got string colors equals and then the 5 colors. And here's how you would go through and print each of those items in the array. For int equals I equals 0, while I is less than colors.length, increment I, right? And then print out colors at index I. So at 0, we're going to print out blue. And let me change from red. At gray, at index 1, we're going to print gray. Lime is going to be 2. Teal is 3. And yellow is 4. So this is a common mistake that people will have, is they'll say less than or equal to, right? Well, remember, colors.length is equal to 5 because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. But remember, we are offset because we're 0 indexed. So that's why we only use less than, right? So if we start at 0 and we do it less than, it's going to do 0 through 4, not 0 through 5. So it's a key concept to remember, and it's probably going to bite you in the butt on more than one occasion until you get the hang of it. Also, keep in mind, when we're dealing with strings, length is a method, right? So it has parentheses after it, whereas with an array, length is an attribute, so it doesn't have a parentheses after it. It's an actual variable that just stores the value, where length is a method that has to be accessed. So you'll probably make that mistake a couple times too. So remember the difference between them. So here's an example of us going through this colors array with .length and then printing out the colors using the length of the word. So this, instead of printing out what the color is, it's going to print out how long the word is. So this one's going to print out 4, 4, 4, 4, 6, right? Because we got 4, 4, 4, 4, 6. All right. So remember, notice the difference. No parens, and then we got the parens there on that one.